Okay, so we're going to be talking about what is money. This term we're going to be looking at finances, how money works, how we get it, what we do with it, and all that sort of thing. But let's actually start with, well, what actually is money? Well, way before we had money that we have today, the currency that we have today, we actually had a system called bartering. And what that meant was somebody would be growing wheat in the community and somebody would be having cows. And then what would happen is a person with the cows would need some wheat. And so they'd go to the person with the wheat and say, I'm going to give you some cow in order to get some wheat. And then they'd negotiate about how much wheat you should get for a cow or a bit of cow and things like that. So there was no currency, there was no medium of exchange. There was actually just goods being transferred from one person to another. Now that's kind of easy if you've got wheat and cows, but then let's throw some clothes in. I've chosen, quite old clothes here for the modern age. I just like old English. So, let's say the person who's making the clothes, they want a bit of cow. So they go to the person with the cow and say, I've got some clothes. And the person with the cow goes, yeah, I don't need any clothes, but I need some wheat. All right, well, that means the person with the clothes needs to go and talk to the person with the wheat, needs to get the wheat, then needs to go back to the person with the cows and give them the wheat in order to get the cow. So already it's getting complicated and we only have three goods. So in our economy we have goods, which are things that we can touch, like wheat and cows and clothes. And then we have services, and that's things like your haircut or going to the doctor. So you're actually receiving something and paying something for it, but it's actually something that you can't touch. So goods and services is what we have in what we can spend our money on. One we can touch and one we can't. So here we have three goods. Already it's getting complicated. So imagine all the goods that you've got in your life. If you had to go and barter for different things from different people in order to get what you actually want, you could actually have to barter 10 times in order to get to actually what it is that you want. So what happened was we came up with the medium of exchange. The medium of exchange meant that there was something that had inherent value in itself. There was a recognition that we could transfer, instead of having a wheat and cow, we could actually give this medium of exchange for the wheat, and that same medium of exchange could be used for a cow. I've got a picture of these shells here because they are actually a form of currency. So somebody would collect the shells, so they're spending their time collecting shells, so they're going out and finding money, or the medium of exchange, and then it would enter in what we call the economy. So that's when we're all buying things from each other. We call that an economy. When there's goods and services being sold, that's an economy. And this particular community, they chose to use shells, so different shells had different values depending on how rare they were. Gold, of course, is something that became quite common in the Western world and in the trading world in early times. The Aztecs, of course, they had a lot of gold and people went in and tried to steal gold from them. So gold is quite desirable and it became a good medium of exchange. But the problem with gold is that it's quite heavy. So when you're walking around with it in your pocket, it's actually really difficult to move around with. So that brought us to paper. Okay. So initially it was trade receipts. So when trade became a big thing worldwide, what that meant was that, you didn't want to get to port and then have to collect all this gold and then take it with you. Because your ship was worth actually quite a bit of money. So what would happen is that somebody would hand you a piece of paper, a trade receipt, and say that you brought a ship into port that was carrying this many goods, and this many goods was worth this much gold. So basically you now have that much gold. But even though there's no really gold being changed in your hands, right? So no gold has actually been exchanged. Pieces of paper have been exchanged instead, representing the gold. So this actually led to promise notes. So promise notes were issued by banks, and they were saying things like, we promise that this person has this much gold in the bank. And then what that meant was that you could go out on the town and you could say, see, I have this much gold. And then you would write promise notes to people saying you promise them this much gold. And then that would be honoured by the banks. And then, of course, what we did is we moved into banknotes. Now, what's really important to remember, of course, is coins existed for a really long time. So in ancient China, ancient Egypt, ancient Rome, they all had coins. So what I'm talking about here is paper money. And I believe in ancient China they also had paper money as well, but somebody needs to Google that. All right, so then we moved into banknotes, and you actually have mints making all the banknotes, and formalized sort of currency systems. And now, of course, what we have is electronic money. So the money doesn't exist at all, so we don't even have pieces of paper anymore. What we do is we just transfer money around using the internet, but I'll talk about that in a bit. In fact, I'll talk about that now. So what we've got here is that you have money in a bank, but it's not really there. It's actually just zeros and ones. And we call it zeros and ones because that's the binary code for computers. So all the money exists in the computers. It's actually not real. So you go into a shop with your device, and you swipe your device, and then your bank, which is this bank here, talks to their bank, and the money transfers between the 2 points. But it's all electronic, and it's not real. So money's not real anymore. It's just, in the ether, on the internet, and it exists. This is why we have things called cryptocurrencies now. So you may have heard of Bitcoin. That really never existed. It doesn't even have a representation. So when you've got your bank account, it might have $100 in it. Well, that represents a $100 note, or 250s or 520s. So it actually represents that, that real cash. But something like Bitcoin doesn't even have a real life representation. It is virtual. It is completely online, completely not real. So let's talk about credit, because credit's actually a problem when money's not real. When money's not real, you don't realise you're spending it. So when I get my pay, I've got an allowance each fortnight where I can actually spend on fun things like going out. So I have that actually in my wallet as cash. And when that cash runs out, I can't spend any more money. So I can't go out with friends, can't buy anything. Some people don't do that. Some people do use this virtual money, this money that doesn't exist. And that means that you're actually borrowing money. So there are 3 different kinds of people that you can borrow from. You can borrow from a bank. So that would be things like a home loan or a car loan or a personal loan. So you may have heard the term mortgage. That's actually a home loan. So, you can actually borrow from a bank. That's quite a formalised arrangement, and they will charge you interest. So that means if you borrow $100 and there's a 10% interest rate, you're going to have to pay back $110. So this is how banks make money. Okay, they make money out of the interest that they charge people on their loans. You can also borrow from a person. On TV, you may have heard about loan sharks. Loan sharks are people who may be lending out money illegally, so they actually don't have any frameworks around it. However, there are legal loan sharks, and these are companies that aren't banks, but they are financial type institutions. But they do charge much higher interest rates, and they've got much higher penalties. So I don't recommend loan sharks of any description, the legal or illegal kind, because they will charge you a lot of interest. But they will lend to people who can't get money from a bank, because a bank has a range of criteria that you have to meet in order to borrow money from them. Like you have to have a job, you have to have a certain amount of income coming in depending on how much you want to borrow. Whereas some loan sharks, you can just walk in and say, give me some money, and they will, and then you have to pay it back regardless. Of course, the most common form of credit in Australia is actually credit card debt. So you may even have a credit card yourself. Your parents will probably definitely have, and carers will definitely have a credit card. This is actually the most common form of bankruptcy in Australia. Now, bankruptcy is when you spend all your money and have no money left. That means that the bank can come and take your home away from you. They can take all your possessions from you and try and sell them to make the money back. Credit cards can be really, really dangerous. The reason why is they often charge quite high interest rates. So if you spend $100 on your credit card, you have to pay back $120, but that $120 you have to pay back is the next month. All right, so you've got 4 weeks, and then it puts another $20 on. So you can imagine if you've got a $5,000 debt and it's a 20% interest rate, that's a lot more money. I can't do maths, so somebody can work that out. All right, credit cards are quite dangerous if you don't know what you're doing with them. It's really important you stay aware about what you're spending on your credit card, and ideally you should be able to pay it out each month. Because again, it's this kind of money that's not really yours. You are borrowing it, and then you will be charged interest and you will have to pay it back. But let's talk about what money actually is, right? So we've seen that it could be shells, it could be gold, it could be pieces of paper, promise notes, so let's have a quick chat about it. The key characteristics here are durability. So it needs to be something that you can have in what we call circulation. So it needs to be able to be passed from one person to the next, and have it not destroy in any way, shape or form. This is why coins were really good early currency. Coins were also a good early currency because they were valuable. So this last attribute down here, this last characteristic, so they actually had the gold in them. So if it was a gold coin, a silver coin, it actually had what the silver was worth in that coin. So the value was inherent in the coin itself. These days, of course, it's not, because they're plastic in Australia, and the coins themselves are actually different alloys and aren't worth anything really in relation to what the metal is. So the value is actually something that we agree, but I'll talk about that one when I get down to here. So it's going to be portable, carry around. That's why we didn't like gold very much. It was too heavy. This is why we moved to notes. Divisible. Okay, this means it's got to be able to, we can have a $100 note, a $50 note, a $20 note. Yeah, we've got to be able to give change. It's got to go down into smaller units. So that's important to remember when you're thinking about different types of money. So in the shells, for example, different shells would have had different value. It's got to be hard to counterfeit. So that means that it can't be made illegally. So today we have governments that make the money for us. So out at Deakin is the Royal Australian Mint. If you've ever been out there, it's worth having a look at. That's where the coins are made. And that was the same in ancient times as well. They would actually have a process where they would put the face of the leader on the back of the coin, and they would do that using a particular stamp. And only a very few people had that stamp, and you'd be able to tell that it was done by somebody else because it wouldn't look quite right. But of course, back then as well, the value of the coin itself was actually inherent in the actual alloys that were in the coin. Okay, it must be generally accepted by a population. This is really interesting. $20 is worth $20 because we say it's worth $20. It's not because it's actually worth $20 anymore. So if we don't agree that it's worth that anymore, then it's no longer worth that, right? We actually have to agree that that's okay. In Venezuela, there's actually had a massive inflation. Inflation is something we'll talk about, but basically money became worth nothing. So people were throwing it out in the streets because it became worthless, because the population went, this isn't worth anything to us anymore. So it is only worth something because we agree it's worth something. And valuable, I've already spoken about that. So money is kind of an interesting thing. It's got to have these characteristics, and we're actually going to do exercise on this in class. So, I'll put this slide up in class and we'll do a little exercise on this. So that's money. Hope you enjoyed.